$200. That is all I'm giving you. Eli, you must learn to survive.
The old man's hands trembled as he set 3 envelopes on the mahogany table. Not from age, from the weight of what was inside them. $200, Harold Whitfield said. That's it. That's your inheritance test. His eldest son, Marcus, laughed, the kind of laugh men use when they think a joke is being played on them. Dad, we run a $4 billion company. What is $200 supposed to prove? Everything, Harold said. Or nothing. That depends on you. The room went quiet. Outside the tall windows of the Whitfield estate, autumn was stripping the trees bare, one leaf at a time. The same slow way age had been stripping Harold down for the past year. He was 78 years old. He had built an empire from a rusted-out pickup truck and $40 in a coffee can. He had buried a wife. He had raised 3 sons who no longer knew how to look at him without calculating what he was worth to them. And now, with a heart that was failing faster than his doctors wanted to admit, Harold Whitfield had one final decision to make. Not about stocks, not about real estate holdings or the board of directors, about which of his sons, if any, actually deserved what he'd spent a lifetime building. He wasn't going to decide with lawyers. He was going to decide with $200 in 30 days. Marcus was the oldest, 44, sharp-suited, a corner office at Whitfield Industries that he'd been given, not earned. He believed in efficiency, leverage, and the idea that sentiment was for people who couldn't do math. When his father slid the envelope toward him, Marcus didn't even open it right away. He just stared at Harold like the old man had lost his mind. "You're seriously doing this," Marcus said. "An inheritance test with pocket change. I built this family's fortune with less than that," Harold said. "I want to see what you build with it." Next to Marcus sat Daniel, 41, the middle son, the charming one, the one who'd never met a room he couldn't work or a woman he couldn't win over, but who had also never held a job longer than 18 months. Daniel took his envelope and turned it over in his fingers like it was a party favor. "So what? We spend it and report back? Sounds like a game show. Call it whatever helps you sleep," Harold said. And then there was Eli, 36, the youngest, the one who hadn't sat at this table in 3 years. Not since the blow-up over the company's expansion into oil that Eli had walked away from on principle, calling it a betrayal of everything their mother believed in before she died. Eli had been living 2 hours outside the city, working as a maintenance supervisor at a mid-sized apartment complex, driving a truck with 190,000 miles on it. He hadn't wanted to come to this meeting at all. He'd come because his father asked him directly, and because some stubborn part of him still couldn't say no to that voice. Harold slid the 3rd envelope across the table. Eli didn't touch it right away either. He just looked at his father, really looked at him, and noticed for the first time how thin Harold had gotten. How gray. 30 days, Harold said again, to all 3 of them now. Take the $200. I don't care what you do with it. Spend it, invest it, give it away, burn it. I don't care. But when you come back here in 30 days, you're going to show me what it became in your hands. And I'm going to decide, once and for all, which one of you is worthy of what I've spent my life building." Marcus scoffed. "Worthy? Dad, this isn't the Bible. This is a company with 11,000 employees." "Then maybe," Harold said quietly, "it's time somebody around this table remembered that those 11,000 people are why any of this matters at all." Nobody said anything to that. Daniel picked at his cufflink. Eli finally reached out and took the envelope, sliding it into his jacket without opening it, like he already knew the money itself wasn't the point. Marcus went back to his penthouse that night and did what Marcus always did. He looked for leverage. $200 was nothing to him, less than the tip he'd leave at dinner, and that was exactly the problem. He couldn't think small. He'd spent 2 decades thinking in millions, and his brain simply didn't have the gears for $200 anymore. So he did what any man drowning in his own cleverness does. He tried to turn it into more, fast, through a sure thing a college buddy pitched him over drinks, a cryptocurrency token about to pop. Early access, guaranteed returns. Marcus didn't even blink. He wired the money that night from an app on his phone, already mentally spinning the story he'd tell his father. How he'd 12xed $200 in 3 weeks through market instinct, because that's what winners do. 3 weeks later, the token was worth $4.12. The sure thing had been a rug pull. The college buddy nowhere to be found, his number disconnected. Marcus didn't tell anyone. He sat in his glass office 40 floors above the city and felt, for the first time in a long time, something he wasn't used to feeling: small. Daniel took a different approach. Daniel had never met a problem he couldn't charm his way past, so he treated the $200 like a networking budget. He bought a new shirt, $68, tailored fit, the kind of shirt that says, "I'm doing fine," without saying it. He got a haircut, a good one, $40. And with what was left, he bought drinks for 3 nights, running at the kind of bar where deals get made on napkins, working the room, collecting business cards, telling people he was exploring some new ventures. By the end of the month, Daniel had a stack of 40 business cards, 2 vague promises of "let's circle back," and $11 left in his checking account. He talked to more people in 30 days than most men talk to in a year. He hadn't built a single thing. He hadn't solved a single problem. He'd simply been charming in the direction of nothing, the way he'd been charming in the direction of nothing for 2 decades. Eli drove home that first night with the envelope still unopened on his passenger seat. He didn't touch the money for 4 days. He kept thinking about his father's face, the gray in it, the tiredness, and something else too, something that had been bothering him since the meeting. His father hadn't asked them to make money. He'd asked them to show what the money became in their hands. Eli managed the maintenance staff at Brookhaven Apartments, 42 units, mostly retirees and young families who couldn't afford much else. He knew every tenant by name. He knew Mrs. Alvarez in Unit 14 had been skipping her blood pressure medication some months to make rent. He knew the Petrazan family in Unit 22 had a boy, Aram, who was sharp as a whip, but was going to have to drop out of the community college welding program because they couldn't cover the $240 toolkit the course required. Eli sat with that for 2 more days. Then he did something that would have seemed obvious to nobody except a man who'd spent a decade learning that the smallest acts of decency are usually the ones that matter most. He drove to the hardware supply store where the welding program bought its kits and asked the manager, a heavy-set man named Gus, if they could do anything on price for a hardship case. Gus knocked $40 off, no questions asked, the way people do when someone asks plainly instead of making excuses. Eli put in his $200. He was $8 short. He paid it out of his own pocket without a second thought and drove the kit to the Petrazan family's door himself. Aram's mother cried in the doorway. Aram, 17, quiet, kept saying thank you like the words weren't big enough for what he meant. Eli told them not to mention where it came from. He didn't want thanks. He wanted the kid to finish the program. That was it. That was the whole story. No leverage. No return on investment. Just $208 and a kid who got to keep his tools. Eli didn't think much more about it. He went back to fixing leaking faucets and replacing broken locks. And if he thought about the 30-day deadline at all, it was with a kind of dread, because he had nothing impressive to bring back to that table, nothing that would look like anything next to whatever Marcus and Daniel had cooked up. What Eli didn't know was that Aram Petrazan finished the welding program 4 months later at the top of his class, got hired immediately by a structural fabrication company outside the city, and within a year was making more money than his father ever had. Money that let his mother finally see a cardiologist about the chest pains she'd been ignoring for 2 years. Money that changed the entire trajectory of a family that had been 1 bad month away from losing everything. None of that had happened yet. Not on the day the sons were due back at the Whitfield estate. But it was already set in motion, the way real consequences always are, quietly, without an audience, long before anyone claps. There's something you should know about Harold Whitfield that his sons had mostly forgotten. or never fully understood. He hadn't always been a billionaire. At 23, Harold had $11 to his name and a wife 6 months pregnant with Marcus. He'd been offered a job, a good one, steady, safe, at a firm 2 states away. And on the same week, a neighbor down the road, a widow named Ruth Calloway, had her barn roof collapse in a storm with nowhere near the money to fix it and 3 dairy cows that would freeze to death without shelter before winter. Harold had $11 and a choice. He turned down the safe job. He spent 3 weeks helping Ruth Calloway rebuild that barn roof for nothing but the coffee she made him each morning, because it was the right thing to do, and because his own father had once told him that a man who won't help his neighbor for free will never be trusted to lead anyone for money. Ruth Calloway's nephew, it turned out, ran a construction supply company 2 counties over. He heard about the barn. He hired Harold on the spot, not because Harold had the best resume. He had no resume, but because the nephew wanted men working for him who did the right thing when nobody was watching and nothing was in it for them. That job became a foothold. The foothold became a small construction firm. The small firm became Whitfield Industries. Every brick of Harold's empire, if you traced it back far enough, sat on top of a barn roof he rebuilt for free. He had never told his sons this story in full. He'd mentioned pieces of it over the years, the way old men mention things, half buried in longer stories about other things, and his sons had never really listened, because none of them had needed to listen. They'd grown up with the empire already built, the barn roof, and the $11 so far in the past it might as well have been a fairy tale. Harold thought about that barn roof more in the last year of his life than he had in the previous 40. His doctors had given him, at most, another year, maybe 2 if the medication cooperated. He hadn't told his sons that yet either. He was saving it, waiting to see, in these 30 days, whether he had 3 heirs or only one son who understood what an inheritance was actually supposed to mean. The day came. Autumn had turned colder, the trees fully bare now, and the 3 sons sat once more at the long mahogany table while Harold, thinner still, poured coffee with a hand that shook just slightly more than it had a month before. "Tell me," Harold said, "what $200 became." Marcus went first, because Marcus always went first. He talked about market timing, about an investment opportunity that didn't pan out this time, but demonstrated his instinct for identifying asymmetric upside. He used the phrase calculated risk for times. He did not mention the college buddy or the disconnected phone number. When Harold asked him plainly, "Did you make anything? Did you help anyone?" Marcus's jaw tightened, and for just a moment, something honest flickered across his face before he covered it back up with confidence. "It's $200, Dad. It was never going to change the world." "That's not what I asked you," Harold said. Daniel went next, and Daniel was smoother, because Daniel was always smoother. He talked about relationship capital, about how business in this century runs on networks, about the deals that were in motion from the conversations he'd had. He name-dropped 3 of the 40 business cards. Harold listened to all of it with the patient, unreadable expression of a man who had sat across from 1,000 pitches in his life and knew exactly which ones were built on sand. "What did you build, Daniel?" "Relationships are what you build, Dad. That's the whole." "What did you build?" Harold said again, quieter, and Daniel had no answer that wasn't just another version of the same sentence, dressed up differently. Then it was Eli's turn, and Eli almost didn't want to speak at all, because compared to market instincts and relationship capital, what he had felt embarrassingly small. He told it plainly, without dressing it up, because he didn't know how to dress things up and had never tried to learn. "I found a family in my building. Kid needed tools for a welding program, or he was going to have to drop out. I covered what the 200 didn't. That's it. That's what I did with it." Silence settled over the table. Marcus actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "That's it. You gave it away." "You asked what it became in our hands," Eli said. "In my hands it became a welding kit for a kid who needed one." Harold didn't say anything for a long moment. He was looking at Eli the way a man looks at something he hasn't seen in a very long time, and had almost convinced himself didn't exist anymore. "Do you know his name?" Harold asked. "The boy." "Aram," Eli said. "Aram Petrozan." "Do you know how he's doing?" Eli shook his head. "I didn't do it to keep tabs on him." And that single sentence was the exact moment Harold Whitfield made his decision, though he didn't say so yet. Because that was precisely the answer Harold himself would have given 40 years ago if anyone had asked him about a barn roof he rebuilt for a widow he never expected anything from. Harold stood up slowly from the table, walked to the window, and looked out at the bare trees for a long moment before he spoke again. "I need to tell you all something," he said. "My heart is failing. The doctors give me a year, maybe less." The room went cold in a different way now. Whatever competition had existed between the three sons collapsed instantly into something more human. Even Marcus looked, for a moment, like a son and not a competitor. "I'm not telling you that for sympathy," Harold continued. "I'm telling you because it's why this test mattered so much to me. I don't have time left to watch you figure out on your own who you are. I needed to see it now. All three of you." He turned back to face them. "Marcus, you took $200 and tried to turn it into more because that's all you know how to do with anything. Money, time, people. You've built a career on leverage, and you've built almost nothing on trust. I'm not disowning you, but you are not ready to run what I built because you still think the company is the 11,000 employees problem and your bonus is your own." Marcus's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. Somewhere underneath the suit and the confidence, a small part of him had known this was coming. "Daniel, you spent $200 making yourself look successful to people who will forget your name in a week. You are the most likable man I have ever raised, and you have never once used it for anything but yourself. That ends, or your likability becomes the very thing that empties you out." Daniel looked at the table. "And Eli," Harold's voice caught slightly, the first real crack in it all day. "You took $200 and gave a stranger's kid a future, and you didn't even think it was worth mentioning until I dragged it out of you. That is the barn roof, son. That's it exactly. That's the whole inheritance, right there in your hands, and you didn't even know you were holding it." Harold didn't strip Marcus and Daniel of everything. That wasn't the man he was, and it wasn't the lesson he wanted to leave behind. Instead, he restructured the entire company's leadership. Eli would take over as CEO, not because he wanted the title. He didn't, and said so plainly, uncomfortable with it in a way that made Harold trust him even more, but because Harold insisted the company needed someone at the top who still remembered what a barn roof was for. Marcus and Daniel were given real roles too, not charity, but roles with genuine responsibility and genuine stakes, on the condition that they spend 18 months working directly alongside the people their decisions actually affected. Marcus on the manufacturing floor, Daniel in community relations, out from behind the desks that had let them forget what the company was actually for. It wasn't punishment. Harold made that clear. It was a second chance to learn what Eli had never had to unlearn. A year passed. Harold's heart gave out on a quiet Tuesday morning in spring, in his own bed, with all three of his sons in the house, something that hadn't happened in over a decade. He went peacefully, and if a man can go out satisfied, Harold Whitfield went out satisfied, because in the last months of his life he'd watched his youngest son run a company with the same quiet decency he'd once used to rebuild a widow's barn roof, and he'd watched his other two sons, slowly, awkwardly, start to remember what that decency looked like too. Aram Petrozan, 22 years old by then, top welder at his fabrication company, came to the funeral. Nobody had invited him. Eli had simply mentioned once, in passing, months earlier, what his father's whole life had actually been built on, and Aram had never forgotten the name Whitfield, or the man who'd once knocked on his family's door and asked for nothing in return. He stood in the back of the church, in a suit that didn't quite fit, and cried for a man he'd met exactly once. Eli saw him there after the service and walked over. and the two of them stood together for a while without saying much of anything, because neither of them had ever needed many words to understand each other. "How's your mother?" Eli finally asked. "Good," Aram said. "Real good. She got her heart checked out finally. Doctor says she's fine." Eli nodded and didn't say anything else because there wasn't anything else that needed saying. $200. That's all it ever was, on paper. But Harold Whitfield hadn't been testing his sons on what $200 could buy. He'd been testing them on who they were when nobody was watching and nothing was expected in return. Only one of them had passed without even realizing there was a test to take.